Hi everyone, this is Jim. With this video I'm beginning my coverage of the U.S. Chess Championship taking place in St. Louis, the 2015 U.S. Chess Championship. So we're already on round 7, so we're picking up the action in the middle, but it's a total of 12 rounds, so we have some interesting rounds to go, interesting play ahead, I'm sure. From round 7, I selected the game between Wesley So and Alexander Onischuk. So Alexander Onischuk with the black pieces here. He's a veteran player, a veteran U.S. Veteran of many U.S. championships, and he won the U.S. championship in 2006. He's 39 years old, and he's currently coach at the Texas Tech University chess team. So his opponent Wesley So came to the U.S. in 2013, just 2 years ago, and he was been playing for the Webster University chess team. In 2014, he switched his allegiance to the U.S., so he now plays for the U.S. officially, and so he's competing in the U.S. championship. And at 21 years old, he's a young, up-and-coming, and very strong player. He's one of the top 10 players in the world. Now, Wesley has not had the best tournament so far. He's actually already suffered 2 losses, one at the hands of young Sam Sevian and another at the hands of young Ray Robson. So it's clear that we have a lot of up-and-coming young players in the U.S., and competition is pretty fierce. But, well, we'll see what kind of spirit he brings to this game, if he can score a win and get back into the hunt for the championship. Okay, so Wesley So kicks off with e4, and Onischuk replies e5, and we get a Ruy Lopez. So we follow the main line for a while, the closed Ruy Lopez. And after knight f6, white castles, bishop e7, this is the main line, rook e1, and b5, kicking the bishop back. Bishop goes to b3, and now black chooses to castle here, signaling black's intention to play the Marshall Gambit, a very exciting way to play. The traditional move here, the main line of the Ruy Lopez, is d6. So this move indicates that black is perhaps thinking of playing the Marshall Gambit, although it's not a commitment yet. So if white wants to avoid the Marshall Gambit, there are various anti-Marshall moves that can be played. h3, d3, a4 are the top choices. Also d4, it turns out, is playable, although maybe a bit tricky. But Wesley So is not afraid of the Marshall Gambit, and he plays c3. And now the black player at this point, if he chooses, could just play the move d6 and transpose back into the main line, because c3 is the move in the main line of the Ruy Lopez anyway. So black maintains the choice still at this point. It could be that sometimes the black players can castle first and see if white plays one of the anti-Marshall moves, and then if they play the main line, just continue with d6 and continue on in the main line. But that was not Onischuk's intent. His intent here was to play the Marshall Gambit, and that's the move d5. And we'll see how it's a gambit in just a move or two. First there's this exchange, knight takes, and now you can see that the e-pawn is hanging. So this is the gambit. d5 is played, leaving the e-pawn under-defended. There's 2 attackers now after the exchange and only 1 defender, and white can just grab that pawn, which he does. Knight takes, and rook takes. So you might wonder, what's the big deal about this gambit? Black has just given up a center pawn, but you can see that white's pieces are not developed, and the one piece he has out, besides the bishop, is going to have to go back. Actually, it's a rook that's not well supported out here and is going to get chased away. So black gets quite a few moves of development. First of all, c6 is played to support the knight. I should mention that the original Marshall Gambit is played with the move knight to f6 here, another way of dealing with the threat to the knight. And that was how Marshall played it when this was played against Capablanca, the game Marshall Capablanca. And that also leads to a pretty dangerous attack. The idea is the knight will come to g4, the queen will come to h4, and you get a big attack over here on the king side, which is also what happens in the mainline Marshall Gambit. So we'll see some of these same ideas. But I just wanted to mention that knight f6 is also can be a very tricky move, although Capablanca found the way to defend. Anyway, in this game we get the mainline Marshall with c6. And now d4 is the most common move. But eventually, well, the next move, black is going to play bishop d6 and chase the rook away, so the rook is going to come back to e1 sooner or later. That's pretty typical of where it goes. And now bishop to d6. And at this point, white reveals his plan. He's not planning to play d4, but to play d3. So we're in a bit of an offbeat variation of the Marshall gambit, not the absolute main line. So as in the mainline Marshall, black could continue with queen h4, but the top choice at this point is maybe slightly more accurate. This move bishop to f5, putting a little pressure on this d pawn, which is sitting here since it didn't go all the way to d4, but it stopped at d3. It's a little bit vulnerable. It needs to be defended by a piece. It does have the advantage that it controls some squares around the center here, so white has a little better center control in this line. And now the move queen f3 is played, just getting the queen over to where it can help defend the king side. A lot of times g3 and queen g2 are played in this configuration because of the attack that comes starting with queen h4. And notice that queen f3 was incidentally threatening to take the bishop on f5, and black just ignores that threat and threatens to take on h7. So you have to wonder a little bit about this. Is it safe to take that bishop? Actually, it can be played, it appears. After you take, queen takes h7, chasing the king to f1, and now rook a to e8, threatening checkmate. So this leads to a pretty strong attack for black, and actually more than enough compensation for the loss of the bishop. If we play on a few moves, let's see, white can avoid getting mated by throwing in this exchange, and then playing the move bishop to e3 to block the e-file here. And now, well, black has different ways to continue. He could exchange on e3 and pick up another pawn, get a little more compensation for his piece. Or he could continue with queen h1 check, driving the king to e2, and then g6, kicking white's queen away. It's pretty interesting. Black is still a piece down, but white's pieces are not developed. The knight is actually pinned by the queen here. The rook is loose on the corner. So this is a pretty strong attack for black, and it's not the best way for white to play to take that bishop. The better move here is to just leave that bishop there and kick the queen with g3. So the queen goes to h3 and defends the bishop and threatens potentially to mate on g2 if the bishop can come over here, get on this diagonal. One of the points of this d3 pawn is it's actually controlling the e4 square, so the bishop is not easily getting to this diagonal. And now a very unusual move is played here by Wesley So. So the most common move is bishop takes d5, getting rid of one of the attacking pieces. And that's an okay move. Play would continue with maybe some slight edge to white. What Wesley decides to do here, though, is to play bishop e3. This has been played before, so it's not an innovation, but it's not very common. It's just giving this pawn back immediately and saying, okay, you can have your pawn back now, and I just want to get my pieces developed. So black has nothing better than to grab the pawn. And white continues with just piece development, developing the knight to d5. And at this point, Onischuk retreats his bishop to f5. The other move there, actually the move in the database is queen to f5, but these moves are about the same. It's not clear what the bishop is doing on d3, although it does hamper white's development a little bit. But anyway, the bishop retreats to f5. And now bishop to d4 is played, getting this dark squared bishop onto a good square and opening up a line for the rook. So having given the pawn back, the advantage that white has achieved is that he's no longer in threat of being mated. Also, this bishop e3 move opens up the rook and the knight to cover this e4 square. So there's no bishop e4 idea with mating on g2. That's not happening in this position. But rook f to e8, black can contest the e-file. And now c4, hitting the knight and hoping to disrupt black's pawn structure here on the queen side. For a moment, black ignores the threat to the knight and plays bishop to g4, hitting the queen. Now the queen drops back to g2, often an idea to defend in this way. There's an exchange of queens. And now the knight is moved. Knight to b4 is played. Coming forward and kind of taking a look at the c2 square, which would fork the two rooks here. Although at the moment it's guarded by the bishop. So, but this turns out to be an active square for the knight. So good play by Onischuk. Knight to e4 is played here, getting the white knight activated, and then hitting the bishop. The bishop drops back to f8. Just stays out of the way of the rooks back here and defends some key squares on the king side, including this g7 pawn, which is already under some pressure. C takes b5 now, resolving the tension over here with the pawns, and knight to g5. If we back up here, the chess engine has a really interesting suggestion right here. Instead of taking back immediately, black can throw in the move bishop to e6. And this is a pretty interesting idea. First of all, white can't take the bishop because this knight fork is too annoying. Well, I'll take that back. Bishop takes. This can be played. Rook takes. And now something needs to be done about the c2 square. So knight to c3, retreating the knight and opening up the rooks so that if knight c2, then there's an exchange of rooks. And at the end of all of this, well, let's say after rook takes, now black can capture the pawn. So we may end up in a similar kind of position in the game. I just thought that was kind of an interesting intermediate move. You have to check those out to see if you can get some kind of advantage out of them. But Onischuk just took back, which is still okay for black. Now the knight goes to g5, also opening up the e-file and allowing some exchanges. The bishop drops back to h5. Yeah, there was also the threat. The knight and the bishop are now coordinating on the f7 square. So the bishop drops back to h5 to defend that. g4 kicking the bishop. The bishop goes to g6. It doesn't want to grab the g-pawn and give up the f-pawn. That would be too weakening to the king side, and it would also lose the exchange because that rook would go. And now f4, threatening to trap the bishop. So seems like Wesley So is getting quite a lot of activity out of his position here. Even with the queens off, we see the even material. Both sides have the bishop pair and a balanced pawn structure, the same, or symmetric pawn structure, 3 and 2 for both sides. It just looks like white is a little more active here, and so maybe is pressing a little bit. Now knight to c2 is played anyway. The knight can be played there. It's defended by the bishop, and it's forking the two rooks. So the same trick is used. There's this exchange of rooks, and then the rook goes to d1, getting away from the knight. So at this point, Onischuk chooses to take the bishop off, and it looks like this is the start of kind of a downhill path for Onischuk. So the chess engine here is recommending the move h6, which does two things. First of all, remember this bishop is nearly trapped. Just the move f5 here is going to trap the bishop. And kicking the knight, in addition to gaining a tempo on the knight, it also opens up a square for the bishop to retreat to. Although you have to wonder if the bishop is going to get trapped back here and maybe shut out of the game. So I think Onischuk is trying to play actively with this knight takes d4 move. But it appears it's just not quite as good as the other move, just kicking the knight with h6. And so a very small difference, but it's these little differences that add up over time, I guess. So there's maybe a little edge to white at this point in the game after this exchange. So now the bishop goes to e7, targeting the knight. And once again, if the pawn comes forward to trap the bishop, now the other bishop can take off the knight. So the knight drops back to f3, once again threatening threatening to trap the bishop. And now Onischuk, we're on move 30 here, so he may have been short on time. Now Onischuk makes a mistake. He plays the bishop to b1, and that's actually the losing move. So let's look at some alternatives here. The engine is recommending h5 here, so I guess this is the main way to avoid losing, although it's not that great looking. So f4 would be played, kicking the bishop. And now there's two ways to play this. If the bishop drops back, then the knight can come forward to e5. And it looks like this is just going to win the pawn. If the rook goes to f8, then there's rook d7 hitting the undefended bishop and increasing the pressure on f7. So that's not particularly good. The recommended move is king to f8, at least getting out of the check. So when the bishop is taken, now the rook can go to d8, and we can get a position like this. After an exchange, rook takes d8, bishop takes d8. We have a knight and a bishop against two bishops, and white has an extra pawn. So you can understand why Onischuk didn't want to play that. There's one more line here. After f5, the move, instead of retreating the bishop, h takes g4 could have been played here, which is a counterattack. So the pawn is attacking the bishop, but this pawn is attacking the knight. And so after pawn takes bishop, pawn takes knight, king takes. And now notice that this pawn is pinned, so it can't really escape. Black is going to lose a pawn in this line too. Rook d8 is played, and well, first taking the pawn can be taken either way, king f8, and then moving the rook aside, say rook to e4. And if we look at this position, white has an extra pawn once again, and we're in endgame. Where black would pin his hopes in this endgame is the fact that the bishops are of opposite color. So if black could exchange off rooks, then he has hopes of drawing this endgame. But as long as white can keep the rooks on, he can press for a victory. So this would be a long and unpleasant task to try and defend this position. So anyway, it's understandable why Onischuk did not want to play either of those moves. So what he played instead was the move bishop to b1. And, well, now here's your chance to think like a grandmaster. You've got the white pieces, and what's the best move here for white? There's only one move that really wins the game here, so see if you can find it. If you want some time to think about it, pause the video. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. It's knight to d2. It's just taking advantage of the fact that this bishop doesn't have any squares to go to. And in fact, it's just trapped here. There's a couple of sort of tactical tries to get out of it, but if the bishop goes back to g6, then white is just going to play f5 and trap the bishop. If you look at all the other squares, they're all covered. The rook and the knight are both hitting that square. The rook covers that square. The bishop covers that square. So there's just nowhere for that bishop to go. There are some other tactical ways to try and play this. For example, bishop to c5, hitting the rook, is one way to try and escape this situation. But the rook just goes to d5, hitting the bishop, and now there's two pieces hanging. This bishop is hanging, and this bishop is hanging, and both of them can't be saved. So there's basically no way out. After knight d2, bishop to f6 was played, hitting the rook from this direction, and now the very nice move. Here's another chance for you to think like a grandmaster, I guess. See if you can guess the move from white at this point. Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. Wesley So found the nice move, rook to d7. So once again, moving the rook with a threat. The threat is now to the f7 pawn. Bishop to e4 check was played. Notice that with this bishop out of the way and with the rook moved, that the rook is defending the square, so the bishop can be played here. But after knight takes e4 and rook takes e4, white is just in very sad. Black is in very sad shape. So rook takes f7 was played. Onischuk throws in this one check, and the king goes to f3, hitting the rook. The rook takes on b2, picking up a pawn, and also threatening the bishop. So if the rook moves to generate some kind of discovered check on the king, the reply can be rook takes bishop. But Wesley So isn't having any of that. He just plays the bishop here to e6, and Onischuk resigns. There's no more way to there's no more way to attack the bishop because this square is covered, so you can't play rook here, for example, to try and put pressure on the bishop. No good way to escape this discovered attack. If the king goes to the corner, then rook to f8 is checkmate. So at this point, Onischuk is losing material. Let's see. The best play would be something like h5, and then rook takes f6 with check. King goes here, and then rook just gets out of trouble, and Wesley So is one apiece. So after the move bishop to e6, Onischuk resigned. So a nice win by Wesley So in round 7, and this puts him back into contention. So at the end of 7 rounds, the leaderboard, we have Ray Robson at the top with 5 points out of 7, tied with Hikaru Nakamura, also with 5 points out of 7. Today, Ray Robson played Naroditsky and won a nice game with the black pieces. And Sam Sevian played Nakamura. Nakamura had the black pieces, and that was a draw. So Sevian is continuing to play well at the tournament. So Robson, Nakamura both at 5 points out of 7, and Wesley So with this win has gotten up to 4.5 points out of 7. So those are the top 3 leaders after 7 rounds. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Stay tuned for further coverage of the 2015 U.S. Chess Championship in St. Louis. See ya.